My name is Katie Miller. I'm a senior staff engineer at Netlify, and I live in Berlin. I work remotely. It's a globally remote company, and yeah, I'm here to talk to you about the boring bits bite back. So authorization is important. Great, I already have fans. I love it. Auth is oftentimes how it's referred, and that term tends to get a little bit confusing because it's actually two systems, authentication and authorization, which live underneath the same umbrella. Authentication is the keys to the castle, so who can enter? Authorization is more about once you're in, who can get into the VIP areas or different areas within the castle. So over my career, I've somehow found myself drawn to fixing the messy authorization systems. This can be tricky and not something most people think they'll spend a career working on. Somehow it seems to be where I shine. And I get it, like who wants to talk about who can get access to which API endpoints? This is probably something that gets security people fired up, but generally it's not the flashy part of a SaaS product. In fact, I would argue that the subject matter is pretty boring, and I think it should be. It should be boring and predictable and simple for everyone to use without overthinking it as they build features. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of feature that you market, so very few people tend to give it the attention it deserves. Over time, it then tends to get spicy to work on and less predictable. What's even worse is as you ignore it, its limitations can prevent company growth, or in the worst case scenario, you have security breaches. You know, it's normal for app complexity to grow over time. We've all experienced it. I mean, a nice, fresh, greenfield app is everyone's dream, but the reality is most of us work in legacy systems. Unfortunately, with complexity and authorization, it can make a real mess of things and be very difficult to work with. I'd like to drill home, though, that it doesn't have to be like this. If you think about authorization early on in your app's development, there will be less pain later. So let's build an app together. This will be an example that will kind of show you how things go wrong over time, not necessarily because anybody intends it to, but because things kind of happen naturally in apps as you're moving fast and trying to get to market. And this example will be kind of a real-world example of how people kind of make things work as they're moving along. So our app is going to be called PawTracks. And yeah, so PawTracks is going to be a place where people can manage and track their pet's care. It'll be a place for them to be able to share care instructions with other caretakers and not have to keep track of paper. So we'll spin up a new Rails app. It's my favorite way to create fast applications. I assume this crowd is also on board. And let's fast forward time a little bit. Feature request. We need to allow multiple people to care for a pet. Typically, it's not just you all by yourself. We'll use Rails systems, make an account, add some users, make sure users can belong to an account. There's a refinement, though. Some caretakers are not the pet owner. They actually are like a boarding place or a dog walker. We still want them to be able to take care of a pet, but they don't actually own the pet. So we went from an account having many users, and really the users belong to many accounts as well. And on top of this, one person tends to be the primary caretaker of the pet, whereas the other people are secondary caretakers. Ta-da! This is an authorization feature. So should all caretakers be able to do the same things? Some people might whoops, okay, you probably don't want exactly another caretaker adjusting like your pet's medications or even being able to change your pet's name in the app. So we want to make sure we're checking their roles throughout the application. Really quick, we'll just add a way to have an owner. So if the owner ID matches the user ID, they're the owner. We'll shove the other user IDs into an array and check for it, and they're a caretaker. Piece of cake. In our controllers, we'll do things like this, where we'll check to see if they're the owner and allow them to do the action. Otherwise, we'll render them an unauthorized response. We've shipped it. Done. That was fast. We're going to move forward again in time. And now we're going to add support for our support. We want to do this as simply as possible. So the fastest way to do this is we're just going to check the user's email. I mean, we control access to Google Suite, so we know that only us has our email. And then we'll just check to see and let the admin see what the users can see. We're not going to make a new admin interface. We're just going to allow them to make the same kind of requests as other users. They're either in the account or they're an admin. Moving along, doing great. Moving forward in time some more. We've grown quite a bit, and now we're going to add some bigger features. Now we're working more on like a vet office integration. So at this point, it allows us to have vet and staff at the vet office manage the pet health records. We need more roles now. We have a veterinarian, so we'll have a pet office, and if this user is the owner, they're the veterinarian. If they're an assistant at the office, they're the veterinarian assistant. Make sure we're checking the roles. Here we go. Update controller, looking for that owner or the veterinarian, otherwise, no go. Just to recap, this is kind of where roles are going. We're getting the longer and longer list. Fast forward some more, and we want, actually, as part of that feature, we want to make sure that we're updating the pet medication at the right time. Should not be able to update it if the account is canceled. We might still allow accounts to see some of this information, but we're not going to allow them to use some of the bonus features, like tracking their actual medication. So checking the account, if it's canceled, we do not let them update. You can see we've got a lot of if-else statements piling up. Moving forward, growth is off the charts. We're doing great. Complexity is also significantly increased, but we have a little bit of breathing room, and we have some time to tackle some tech debt. Okay, I'm going to introduce something called the policy authorization pattern. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you're not. But the general premise is we want to be able to answer the question, can a user perform an action on a resource? In code form, this will kind of look like this. So pretty simple to read. Can they update a medication? Why do we like the policy pattern? Well, you can actually implement it really easily without installing any gems. There's plenty of examples online. And we're just going to be able to take the checks that we've put into our controllers, plop them into policies, piece of cake. So here's an example of a policy for pet medication like we just looked at. And I'm not going to go over the intricacies of how the policy is made, but this is the general premise. We have a pet policy class for the pet medication, and for each action that we're going to check, we're going to insert the role checks inside of these methods. I also have a great idea for cleanup while we're doing this, and let's move that account canceled in here because we were just going to issue an unauthorized for that too. Our controllers will look much better, and I'm plowing forward. Refactor is going to be great. Gone are those if-else statements. We just have the basics in our controllers, and I can breathe a sigh of relief. All right, moving on. We've grown quite a bit, and actually these vet offices are not just owned by one vet office. They tend to live underneath a corporate umbrella. And the corporate wants to be able to manage these vet offices. We've entered into enterprise. At this point, you're going to need more roles. So, corporate has some things that you've never really thought about. We need somebody that just manages the finances. We also need somebody that wants to be able to look at all of the data and assess whether or not things are running as efficiently as they could be. Internally, we've added salespeople. And maybe we've multi-tiered our support system, and now people have different levels of access there. Good thing we refactored. We can just add these roles to our policy action methods. We're winning. One day, you get a DM from the product manager, and they tell you that there's this huge deal in the works, and that the head of security has asked you, like, he's got a couple ideas about how he wishes these things were different. He has somebody who wants to be able to do these things that the owner can do, but not everything. And they said something about RBAC. What do you think? Smugly, I think we've already got RBAC. We have role-based access control. Yeah, whatever, no big deal. What exactly are they missing permissions-wise? We probably can just adjust it or make new roles. The PM gives you the longest list of changes that the head of security has told you. And what is occurring to you is that, wow, our roles are going to grow exponentially, and they're asking for changes in our existing roles, which I'm not so sure other customers are going to want. Okay, so you're telling me what exactly? I think they want to be able to make their own roles and specify their own permissions. Yes? What does this look like? It looks like kind of like this. They want to be able to make a role that maybe only works for their setup and be able to specify what permissions they want to be able to control for each resource. So if I needed to make that grid, could I tell you exactly what an owner can currently do in our system easily? Do I have a way of showing what a caretaker can do, or any of the other public roles that we've created? How are we going to go about supporting custom roles in our system? Right now, at this point, most of our roles have some unusual way that this person magically gets the role. Checking emails, checking arrays of IDs. Also, our policies are not just checking the roles at this point. They're also checking state of the account or state of other resources. Are they going to operate in the way that they expect them to operate? And as people have contributed to the app and built out new features, they've also added new policy methods, and they're very interesting. Very unusual things that maybe look like they should be their own resources and actions, but they've nested them all underneath one policy and just move forward. You get back to the PM with the dreaded words, I think it's time for a rewrite. It's like, didn't we just refactor this? How long will that take? PM's classic question. And I'm going to not probably accurately tell you 2 to 4 months. You're optimistic. How long did the last refactor take? The reality is this probably takes 6 months to a year minimum. And the PM is done. Did I mention as well that this was a deal breaker for the enterprise customer? Yes? Of course, this situation is really common in startups. Configurable authorization is not something that comes requested from the customer until the point that you've written a lot of code. We followed the startup principle. We're not going to try to prematurely think ahead about what the enterprise customers are going to want. And people have used all sorts of shortcuts to avoid the dreaded term of auth. They don't want to have to think about it. They just want to build features. The thing is with startups, though, is that change is the only constant. We can plan ahead for certain things. We hope that we're successful and we enter into the enterprise phase where we have big customers. So how could we have done this differently? How could we have built this app so that we aren't at the point where we need a 6-month to 1-year rewrite in order to support custom roles? Let's rewind time and take a look at some ideas I have about how this could have been done differently. Proposal number 1, and maybe this wasn't obvious, but in our example, we weren't really leveraging relational data structures. You know, we've got really weird checks, like checking the string of a role. This is not how we did it, but this is something I have seen in the wild. And we've got all sorts of conditionals for the roles. You know, we just add them as we go, and we're not really thinking about how they're getting made. So it's really hard to remember, how did this user get this role to begin with? Every time you need to go and figure it out. Like, wait a minute, this one's a partner admin. What does that mean? Role names are going to change. You know, someone's going to decide that a collaborator is now a developer. Also, permissions are going to change. You're going to want to update those policies all the time. And what happens when you want to remove a role? So my suggestion is to use join tables. This is not anything novel, but maybe you don't think about it early on when you're writing your app and you're adding a user and you're adding the account. Let's create something that can be modified really easily. The role can be completely separate and live on its own. We'll be able to update role names. We'll be able to add and retire roles. Maybe we have to run a data script to remove the role ID from a member, but that's way easier than trying to make sure a bunch of strings are updated inside of your code base and in your database. And we're going to be able to easily see the role assignments because they're going to be attached to a record that's in our database. One day, roles can then be inserted into that table that come from your customer. Proposal number 2, don't use the policy authorization pattern. This may have seemed like a really genius idea at the time, and this is a soapbox I will stand on very firmly. It's going to make it very hard for you to be able to customize things and really hard for you to be able to see what's going on. Our policy action methods can hold anything that anyone's heart desires. We wanted to stick to the simple question: can a user perform an action on a resource? This is our constraint, except that our methods haven't really enforced that. They have a lot of stuff mixed into them, and they're not centralized. They're all over. I mean, we have to open up many, many files to get an idea of what an owner can do or what a caretaker can do. We really need something that's centralized with declarative permissions per role and resource. I recommend looking around at what other people are doing and also looking at GIMs. This is, I mean, granted, you could have gotten the policy authorization pattern from the GIM as well. However, I think there are other GIMs that are more useful. One example for this is can. It's going to allow you to focus on putting the permissions next to the roles. So ideally, you could open up this file and you have a much clearer picture of what's going on. I'm not going to say it's like the most ideal solution for enterprise, but in the interim, while you're moving towards it, it will allow you to take care of some things that won't get in your way later. And do the same thing for admins here. The goal here is that the role defines the capabilities. They're nested underneath each other. Proposal number 3, try to use CRUD. I think this is something that also happens really easily with RESTful API design. People just want to tack another route underneath a controller, and all of a sudden your controller has 20 different actions that happen on it. And it's sometimes unclear as to what the top resource is. We previously thought of our permissions as internal state that our customers would never see. And if we try our best to stick to CRUD actions, granted there might be things that diverge from this, we find that they're easier to understand and ready to display in the grid. This is something Rails and can encourage, and I recommend using tools to help as well, such as Lentors, documentation and education. When you're laying out how to add a new permission to your system, being sure to call out, please think about your naming. Maybe even setting up, if there is a team that owns this part of the code, making sure that they're required for approval on the PRs. So to recap, try to leverage relational data. I think people want to move fast. They don't think about just adding a class. They think it's maybe too much. It's not too much. It'll help you in the end. Do not use the policy authorization principle. You want things to be as flexible as possible, and you want the roles and permissions to be as simple, just to answer the question, can the user do an action on a resource? Also, stick to CRUD. And I would say this even if you're not building an authorization system, add a new controller, add a new route. Please try to keep it as simple to create, read, update, and delete as possible. And my biggest recommendation is don't innovate in this space. This is not the place to be creative. You have lots of other places you could be putting your time and creativity into, but do give it a little bit of thought, and the sooner the better. You really don't want to be in the case where you're having to rewrite your entire authorization system so that you can onboard new customers. Don't let this boring part of your code bite you back. Thank you so much.